Howdy, y'all. Welcome to King's Comics and welcome to 2019. Now, in 2018, I set out to wrap up my 2018 comic collection as it stood at the end of 2018. However, I got sick, some things came up, I tried to see family, etc., etc. That being said, I'm going to try to close that out as we move into 2018, as we move into 2019. Now, not all of my videos, obviously, are going to be collection videos. I have stated this before in the comments. I don't really like doing collection videos because they feel like a cheap way to drive up subscriber and viewership, as well as that's not necessarily the content a lot of people always want to see. And sometimes I feel like it's bragging on my part. I feel like some people don't have as good of access to comics as I do, and that, that's not what I like. But I do like y'all being introduced to the types of comics I have and being able to ask questions about them. That does make me happy. Is seeing what y'all are interested in. Somebody expressed interest in, I believe, Saga, Descender, as well as 100 Bullets. And that's why I share out my comics, is to gauge interest on what I can be reviewing or what I can be recommending or telling people to steer clear of. That being said, this is part 5 of this series. I'm going to try to wrap it up with one more episode in part 6, and then we're going to get back into the nitty-gritty of reviews, suggestions, recommendations, and some newer content I'm really hoping y'all are excited to see. So, let's go. Once again, this is the rest of my comic collection as of 2018. So, we're going to start off today with Escapo. This one is, once again, an indie comic, right? This is an interesting one by a graphic novelist, Paul Pope. He's another guy who typically likes to be a writer as well as artist on his own work. This one is about an escape artist who compares escaping to, well, the metaphorical as well as very literal concept of fleeing and escaping death. It's very abstract, it's very interesting, but because it's Paul Pope, the art is very gorgeous, kinetic, and fun to watch, fun to read and view. If you haven't read any Paul Pope works, I highly recommend reading Batman Year 100. As you've heard of Batman Year 1 and Batman Year 2, two works I've mentioned, there is a Batman Year 100, which is his take on Batman at 100 years old. It's very, very odd, a little bit frantic at times, but is a fun read. That being said, actually, there's also Batman Zero Year, which is by Scott Snyder. So there are, as far as I know, 4 Batman years that you can read. Zero Year, Year 1, Year 2, Year 3. Actually, that's 5 years. And then Year 100. I'm sure there's a lot more, but that's what I know of right now. Either way, that's the first comic I'm going over today. Then we have Batman Spider-Man Blue. This is, I think if you followed me on Instagram and talked to me, this is one I usually and in the YouTube comments, I frequently recommend, and it's part of what I like to call the Color series by author Jeff Webb and Tim Sale. This is a team that commonly collaborates, and typically when they collaborate, people, it's some of their best works as an artist and as a writer and an artist, separate from one another, but also in teaming up. I call it part of the Color series because there are 4 works in total, and I am blessed. I'm blessed to be able to have and read all 4 of them, which is which is going to be Spider-Man Blue, Hulk Gray, Daredevil Yellow, and Captain America White. Now, a lot of these works, the Color series, all 4 of them pertain to 4 different heroes. Blue is Spider-Man, yellow is Daredevil. Yellow is Daredevil, gray is the Hulk, and white is Captain America. You'll also notice that each one has to do with a color of the respective character's costume, as well as a core component or emotional trait, something of the sort that is key to the character's development. For Blue, tragedy is very much a component of Spider-Man's story. For Yellow, one of Daredevil's original costumes was yellow, but yellow also has to do with the color fear. For Green Lantern fans, as well as fans of Daredevil, you are familiar with this. And the term yellow-bellied is for someone who is cowardly. That being said, then you have Gray. The Hulk was originally pictured as this gray creature, and also ties into the Hulk kind of ambiguous and moral ambiguity, because he's viewed as a monster, but also in trying to do the right thing as Bruce Banner on both sides of the equation. We even see him fight Iron Man in the comic. And then you get into Captain America White, just this idea of innocence and liberty, him fighting for peace, as well as this kind of innocent nature of the times and the comic era that he came out of. Now, these are all 4 fantastic works. I highly recommend all of them for people who want to explore the character nuances of each of these just legendary, pivotal comic book figures. But once again, these are, and this isn't even like a maturity thing. They're very much, I mean, just family-friendly works. You can read them in any age. That's what I love so much about them as well. But they are very emotional. If you're looking for these kind of action-packed tales, or maybe a little bit more violent or grotesque, that's not what you're going to get out of these. You're going to get some kind of a deeper cut, just character interactions, what makes these characters, what drives these characters, and some of the tragedy and triumph they've gone through to become the figures and the heroes that they are today. And then we get into Volume 2 of Rick Remender's Captain America run. This was one of my favorite Captain America just kind of arcs, which is Castaway in Dimension Z. This is the one where he's cast away to Armin Zola's realm that's kind of outside of time and space from the typical universe, and where he kidnaps Armin Zola's, I know, right? He kidnaps Armin Zola's son and raises him as his own. It's a very cool, fun arc. I've already gone over Volume 1. If people like it enough, I'll probably recommend this as in one of my future videos, but I recommend these 2 volumes. I really enjoyed Rick Remender's Captain America just in total. There are 5 volumes before he goes into Sam Cap. That's the Falcon becoming Captain America, but still. Then we get into, oh man, yeah. So one of my favorite, as I've mentioned, not one of my favorite, but this kind of niche, I guess, genre or rather style of graphic novel that I've gone into or kind of touched on is Bande dessinée, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. But it's this kind of French, Dutch, Belgian, etc. Style of graphic novel. And one of the most famous and pivotal works of it is Tintin. I actually have no Tintin comics, but that being said, is Black Sad. And Black Sad is one of my legitimate favorite comics. I pretty much buy these volumes immediately after they come out. But Black Sad is this beautiful noir detective piece with this the titular character, John Blacksad. I believe it's John Blacksad. Yep, John Blacksad, who's this anthropomorphic cat who goes around kind of the American Midwest, as well as just around the world in some cases, solving mysteries. This touches on a lot of racial, political, cultural issues in the backdrop of this noir detective story. It's a very pivotal work, not just in the bande dessinée format, but also, I would argue, in the modern noir genre, and also in the backdrop of this kind of almost sometimes frowned upon section of culture, which is anthropomorphism in modern day graphic novels, comics, media, etc. But I mean, I love it. For those who have watched the TV show Luther, I think you'll very much be a fan of it. And yeah, I mean, heck, if they made a movie out of this, I would think Idris Elba would be the perfect cast for John Blacksad. But this is an incredible comic series. I've got, I believe, all 3 volumes that are in print in English. Amarillo, A Silent Hell, and just the original Blacksad. Now, this is by Dark Horse Comics. As I've mentioned in the past, Dark Horse has been very pivotal in translating a lot of manga over to the U.S., as well as for producing one of their most titular works, which is Hellboy. But or I guess one of their most famous works. But I can't recommend Blacksad enough. Please check it out if you get a chance. And moving on. Now we go into Spider-Man Family Business. This was a part of, I guess, a couple years ago. Marvel was trying to do this idea of OGNs, or original graphic novels. It was, I have to admit, it was kind of executed poorly just because they didn't really commit to it. There were a couple others I'm trying to think of. They did Wolverine, I think, Wolverine Back to Japan or something like that, where he goes back to Japan to fight the Silver Samurai, and even Daken, his son. And I'm trying to remember, there was something else. You got Wolverine, then you've got, I think, man, there were a couple. Honestly, it was kind of just forgettable to me, to be honest. Gosh, I just like Spider-Man, which is why I have this comic, but it involves Spider-Man discovering that he has a long-lost sister. I thought it was kind of just too fast-paced, not in a good way, right? But too fast-paced. It kind of came out suddenly. It didn't really build itself too much off of previous character history, although it does reference the fact that Peter's parents are secret agents, or were secret agents. But that being said, it's not really one I would recommend too strongly. I definitely always recommend exploring books and reading them for yourself to make your own opinions. But yeah, I don't know. I didn't feel too strongly on it, so maybe this is one that I just end up donating to a library or something, just so that they can pad out their collection and so someone else can read it. Then we get into A Long Walk to Valhalla. A couple years back, I saw this recommended a lot, and it was a very emotional journey. It's just this interesting tale of, I think, a man who has to return back to his hometown to take care of his family as well as to tie up loose ends. It's a very, as some of y'all may know if you're familiar with either Thor or just Nordic mythology, Valhalla is a realm where warriors go to once they die. Those who die in battle or die valiantly are sent to Valhalla. Actually, the Punisher, Frank Castle, has gone to Valhalla at one point, or several points. That being said, in Long Walk to Valhalla, we have this very earnest and tragic tale of what death does to us, as well as what letting go actually means. It's I would have to reread this one. I just remember, once again, I read a lot of comics. I remember being very emotionally impacted by this one, so I know that rereading it is going to be a little bit emotionally taxing for me when I do get around to it. Then we get into Last Days of an Immortal. This was kind of an awkward comic to bring up. Not an awkward, maybe an awkward point to bring up, but my families and friends have discovered it's kind of hard to buy comics for me as gifts. Typically, I've either read and from the library, or I just read and bought comics that people try to buy me. So it's pretty hard for people to pinpoint what to buy me. Then a couple years back, my brother out of nowhere found this comic and got it for me. I mean, I was really surprised because I just had not heard of it at the time. I hadn't even heard of the publisher, Archaea. But it's actually become a publisher I stay on the lookout for, just for some more nuanced and niche. I need to look up how to pronounce that. But either way, just some finer grained comics. In this one, we see this I guess social science fiction work of what immortality means in the future. Now, there are two visions of immortality I really like with respect to sci-fi, which are linear, so I guess kind of vertical, immortality, just living forever. And then there's a horizontal vision of immortality. That sounds weird, but hear me out. The idea is you can either live forever sequentially, or what if you could live in parallel lives? Have multiple copies of yourself, walking around. There are two works I've read that have explored this. One is, Demi-Human, which is this, or Ajin, Demi-Human. It's this manga that's coming out. In fact, Netflix had made a series of it, an anime out of it. And then you've got this work, Last Days of an Immortal. It's in the far future where people, humans, can create multiple versions of themselves to go out and then into the universe, explore, try different things, and then they can have them come back and integrate their memories together. But they can also live forever. So the only time they die is when they willingly choose to pass. That being said, the main character goes on this journey as this kind of negotiator as well as a lawyer across the universe, solving these cases and exploring the different cultures and political nuances of different societies and alien races and civilizations. It's very beautiful, very poetic. It's got some mature content in it, but I haven't read too much of the reviews on it. I personally just read it, went in blind, and enjoyed it, and sometimes that's the best way to read comics or explore works. Just go in blind. Holy crap, I just realized I had this, but yeah, so this one doesn't have a cover, but it's Iron Man Extremis. For those who remember Iron Man 3, which I wasn't a big fan of, Extremis was the name of the techno-organic virus that was used to enhance the humans in that movie. Now, Extremis in the comics is this these domestic terrorists get a hold of it and use it to enhance themselves to just try to upset American politics. In order to combat them, Tony Stark, Iron Man, injects himself with Extremis and it enables him to merge with other pieces of technology, enhance his Iron Man suit as well as connection to it. It's a really cool science fiction work, and it's actually by the team Warren Ellis and Adi Granov. Adi Granov does a lot of cover art as well as comic work, and even similar to another artist I mentioned, Jock, does a lot of scene design and a concept art for movies. And then you have Warren Ellis, who I've mentioned before, has worked on some of my favorite comics, including Next Wave, Agents of Hate, as well as writing the Castlevania series, both seasons, for Netflix right now. I really recommend this for just introductory Iron Man work. It's where you get the idea of the bleeding edge armor that you see in Avengers Infinity War. So check it out. Then we get into Hawkeye. I'll blow past this one pretty quick because this is the Fraction Aha run. This is one of my favorite creative teams. They've only worked on, I think, 2 works that I remember. Oh, this is Volume 2. I've already gone over Volume 1, I believe. I think I've gone over Volume 1. But, yeah, this is a Hawkeye book to check out. If I have mentioned it before, it starts this kind of wave of, or is part of this wave of comics, Normcore, which is exploring just these fantastic heroes or beings in a kind of slice of life sense of them just trying to like get by, maybe deal with stuff like buying dog food or hook up their TVs, etc. It's very enjoyable. Yeah, we get into Potter's Field. This is another I guess noir detective-based work about this kind of Man in Black mystery character. Let me double check. It should say his name. I don't know. Man. Weird. Either way, this is a comic I didn't even realize was highly touted or highly renowned. I just found it in a half-price books for like $1 to $2. I just picked it up, which is the best part. Is just finding stuff you don't even know is rare or is enjoyable for $1. But in this one, we just see this kind of Man in Black solving mysteries, but more so, he tries to lay others to rest. Not in a supernatural sense, but he tries to find bodies that just that pass away, people who die in mysterious circumstances, and solve the mysteries behind them, and kind of put their families and loved ones at ease. Really cool. It's by Mark Waid and Paul Azaceta. I think I pronounced his name right. But either way, Paul Azaceta is the one who is drawing or has drawn Outcast alongside Robert Kirkman, a supernatural comic for Image Comics, as well as Mark Waid has, well, he's the writer of the Amazing Spider-Man story I just went over, as well as done a lot of comic-based works, including writing Captain America, as well as, he's written dang near like every hero I can think of, but also written, including one of my favorite Daredevil runs, but also written Irredeemable and Incorruptible, 2 huge deconstructive works about the superhero genre. And then we get into Pacific Rim. Then we get into Pacific Rim. Tales from Year Zero. If you've watched Sean Chandler's channel, Sean Chandler talks about movies. A running joke I try to incorporate and is that I just love the movie Pacific Rim. I say a running joke, but it's very real to me. Pacific Rim rocks, and I understand every argument against it at the same time. That being said, this is a book that kind of grounds the movie Pacific Rim a little bit more, kind of tears apart why they do the things or why things happen in the movie. It's really interesting because it feels like a lot of thought had gone into this comic book, almost in some ways a little bit more thought than went into the movie, about why there are giant robots, why the breach is such a big deal, why you need 2 pilots to drive pilot Jaegers, etc. It was just very interesting to see that the creative team behind it had put in that much thought into this world. Then we get into Miracle Man. I've got 3 volumes of it. I actually have the 4th volume of it that I haven't read yet. But Miracle Man was reinvented by Alan Moore some time ago. And Miracle Man was this really old school, just kind of goody two-shoes, golden age classic hero who he would say these words, Kimota, and he would transform into this kind of golden god-esque, like perfect human who could fly, had super strength, etc. Then Alan Moore gets a hold of the character. And Alan Moore, for those who recall reading or have seen the movies of V for Vendetta or Watchmen, know that he is very much a dark-toned, deconstructive writer. So when you get into Miracle Man, he tears this apart. He provides this very brutal and gritty origin story. A lot of just sci-fi, speculative sci-fi, very weird things going on with this story across 3 volumes of this character's history. Years and years of him like just kind of tearing apart this character's lore and providing a darker air and tone to it, kind of inverting a lot of the things that made the original Miracle Man story so innocent and sweethearted. I freaking loved it. But yeah, that being said, very dark. I do not recommend this at all for children or readers who prefer much more lighter heart family-based comics. Very dark. I've got volume 4, which is which obviously follows the events of these three, but is written by, if I recall, Volume 4 is written by Neil Gaiman as opposed to Alan Moore. And this was re-released by Marvel. Alan Moore was actually very not okay with Marvel re-releasing it, but I know Alan Moore's a bit odd with his takes on graphic novels, and some of which I agree with, some of which are kind of batty. Let's keep it going. Then we get into Mad Max. This is not technically a graphic novel, it is an art book. And art books are weird, right? I mean, art books are this kind of different, it's not actually a contiguous story. It's just these different panels of inspired works by different artists. And while you have art books as this, I know, I'm trying to find a good way to describe this. Either way, it's just a bunch of artists who were inspired by or even worked on the movie Mad Max Fury Road and contributed art to it or just the idea of this book. I enjoyed getting to see these different artists and illustrators' takes on Mad Max or the world of Fury Road, and I enjoyed the movie. So that's just kind of these interesting slices of culture where you get to see what other artists or creators think of another work and how they enjoyed it or how they were inspired by it. Okay, next up. Yep. I maybe have mentioned it before. I'll probably go into it in another video. I keep saying that. I'm building up this list and digging this grave of videos I'm going to have to make. But another one of my favorite series of all time is the Punisher Max run by Garth Ennis. There's a, I'm trying to remember how many issues there are, but he just does an epic run. The Max series, he grounds the character of Punisher. You see no superheroes in this run. All you see is the Punisher tearing through, as I think I've mentioned before in a previous video, you see him tearing through these real-world villains. Some that are on the outer fringes, like crazed hillbillies, who could still technically exist in this day-to-day. But yeah, you see him tearing through Russian mafia, Soviet threats in the Middle East. You see him tearing through just sex traffickers. I mean, there's a lot going on and not a single superhero. It's just Frank Castle, pure unadulterated rage, going against the evils of the world. I've got 5 out of 6 omnibuy, which are these collections of comics, and the 4th volume is incredibly expensive for some reason. It's about $100. Each one of these I've gotten between $10 to $20, so I have no idea. It's just because it's out of print, I guess, but I seriously enjoy this comic book series. I actually managed to collect it after the fact because I had read it while I was still in school at Texas A&M, just reading and exploring each of these and borrowing from the library. And then we go to another Punisher comic from Garth Ennis's run. He actually did he kind of did these 2 Punisher runs for Marvel. He did you kind of got his Max series, right? That is you got one of his Max series that is not based in the main Marvel continuity, the 616 universe, and then you've got another one that is based in the 616 universe and is very gritty, has superheroes in it still. Well, is gritty still, but has superheroes in it. Very, very weird. And then we've got a Punisher from First to Last. These are a series of disjointed, kind of one-off stories for the Punisher that Garth Ennis also wrote. That Garth Ennis also wrote. These are some of the most brutal and beautiful Punisher tales. And when I say beautiful, I mean there's just a lot of kind of, literally poetry going on with the narrative of the character and what has made the Punisher or defines the Punisher. For those also looking for Punisher recommendations, I don't think I have the comic in my collection, but I highly recommend Punisher Born, also by Garth Ennis, going back to Punisher's time in with the U.S. military in the Vietnam War. As some of y'all will recount, modern Punisher stories place Frank Castle, the Punisher, in the Middle East, but that's just to keep up with the times. The original Punisher stories placed him in the Vietnam War, and the Punisher Born storyline looks into this. Then we have Big Guy and Boy Rusty. This is a weird tale by Frank Miller, right? And I believe Frank Miller, about this boy robot, kind of like Astro Boy, right? And this guy named, this boy robot Rusty, and this robot named Big Guy. The robot Big Guy actually turns out to be just a U.S. pilot in a giant robot suit. However, Rusty doesn't know that. So as they fight against monsters and try to just save the world, it's funny because Rusty is not aware, like, is just excited because he thinks that this robot Big Guy is is just a bigger robot. He thinks it's just a guy kind of like him, not aware that it's a human inside the suit. But they actually did make a TV series about this, an animated series. I watched it when I was a kid. I did not get it at the time, but I also didn't know it had like a foundation in comics. It's funny how many things there are like that. But when they re-released it, I wanted to pick it up. I'm not going to say Frank Miller is one of my favorite authors offhand, but he is definitely a pivotal author in the graphic novel world, so I always do try to stay on the lookout for what he's writing. In fact, he is about to write a Superman Year 1 for DC Comics as part of their Black label coming out. Then we get into Spider-Man Reign, which is part of the Marvel Knights series, and I've recommended this one before, and I just found out, turns out a lot of people don't like this comic. I really like it. I really enjoy it, but I just enjoy darker storylines. Well, I'm kind of a binary like that, right? I really enjoy very lighthearted storylines as well as very dark storylines. I like exploring the kind of dichotomy between them, but I really enjoyed Spider-Man Reign because it's I think I've talked to I believe I was talking to one of my subscribers. Subscribers and friends. I'm trying to remember who it was. Dude, I'm sorry that I'm forgetting your name. I'm blanking. But we talked on Instagram. But I recommended this work because it's kind of like The Dark Knight Returns, but for Spider-Man. You see him in the far-off future, fending off the Sinister Six and another takedown, but after having given up being Spider-Man and just being an older man. Very, very weird. There's a lot of elements I understand people would not like about this story, but once again, please check it out and make your own opinions. Oh my gosh. Okay. Let's keep it going. So, Pride of Baghdad. This is also by Brian K. Vaughan. Let's see. Art by Nico Henrichon. So, Brian K. Vaughan, I've mentioned a lot before in these previous previous videos, but this is a story about a pack of lions. I know, right? Just 3 lions traveling or traversing across the Middle East, just trying to survive. This is very interesting. This oddly grounded tale because these are just legitimate lions, and you hear their thoughts, their interactions, and communicating with one another about their tales of survival in the Middle East, outside of and involving the human wars and conflict going on around them. It's very interesting, and I believe it's actually based on real-world events, not that these humans we're talking about, but about 3 lions that were killed in the Middle East during just a lot of civil unrest. I would have to review that and look into it, but as far as I know, Brian K. Vaughan just kind of built a backstory for these lions up until their time of passing. Then we get into Power Man and Iron Fist. Power Man and Iron Fist have a long history in comics, with Luke Cage, I believe, being one of, if not the first, black superhero to get his own publication, his own serialization. In fact, he's been hired before to take out Spider-Man by James Jonah Jameson. But Power Man and Iron Fist are these 2 year. Well, obviously, for those who've watched the Marvel Comics Netflix TV series, are probably familiar with the fact that Power Man and Iron Fist being Danny Rand, have teamed up before and kind of worked together and have this friendship that's more and better explored in the comics. In fact, for those who didn't know, Luke Cage actually does marry Jessica Jones and have a kid together with her in the comics. But going back to that, this is just kind of a reinvention and re-exploration, or revival and re-exploration of this friendship between these 2 heroes as they work together in New York just to defeat crime. It's a lot more lighthearted, a lot funnier, and I just think the creative team, that's Walker and Greene, really nailed the tone of these heroes and their interaction and their friendship. Then we go into Plutona. Fun fact, this is going to sound really weird, but Plutona is by Jeff Lemire, one of my favorite authors who I've mentioned time and time again throughout this video series. I mean it when I say he's one of my favorite authors. I always stay on the lookout for whatever he puts out, and 9 times out of 10 will buy or at least read anything he's put out. That being said, Plutona is pretty much this the superhero version of Stand By Me. For those who have watched the movie or read the Stephen King book, I believe it's a book or a short story, either way, by Stephen King. Okay, so in this one, you just have these kids discover this famous hero, Plutona, but more so than the hero, they discover her body. She's died in battle, passed away, and it's this kind of not just this mystery, right, about like why she died, what killed her. This is explained as the comic goes on in these short stories and epilogues, but rather what it does to these children, their interactions, and their friendship in terms of being a formative event in them growing up. Then, wow. Fun fact, if you stack a lot of comics on top of each other, they will start to fall over. So, now we get to Outcast. As I mentioned before, Paul Azaceta is the author on this. And if that name sounds familiar, that's because he was the one who worked on Potter's Field with Mark Waid, which I had mentioned earlier. And this is written by Robert Kirkman, one of the founders of Image Comics, as well as creator of Invincible and The Walking Dead. Outcast is a story about this man who feels that he's downtrodden. A lot of just bad things have happened in his life. And you find out it's because of just personal demons. Legitimate personal demons. His mother was possessed by a legitimate demon as a kid. He's had those he loves around him possessed by demons. I believe even his ex-wife was possessed by a demon, leading to some domestic abuse going on in the series. There are a lot of terrible things that have happened in this series that are all relating to demonic possession. But you find out that he also has the ability to to exorcise people, not even in a explicitly spiritual way, but in a physical, encountering them, drawing their demons out of them way. It's a very cool, dark comic that I'm still trying to read. I believe it had a TV show adaptation. I haven't followed up with that, but I recommend it, at least the first several volumes. I still need to catch up, but it's a fun ride. Yep. Those definitely fell over. Moving on. The Omega Men by Tom King. The Omega Men was a old school series of DC heroes that came out back way in the day, but Tom King went ahead and revitalized them with different members in this comic series. It was a limited run, and he actually, rather than just focusing more so on this weird galactic kind of this space opera, right? He grounds it in with his experiences in the CIA and some political worldviews relating to our conflict with the Middle East and just the world in general. It involves Green Lantern Kyle Rayner kind of discovering this series of galactic civil unrest, these conflicts going on that are above and beyond his understanding, and him realizing that morality is far more skewed and ambiguous than he'd hoped upon entering the fray. That being said, it's also cool because we see Kyle Rayner, the Green Lantern, as a White Lantern, so having mastered all 7 parts of the emotional spectrum. So this is a really cool comic, but it's got a lot of deeper undertones for those who are just wanting something kind of mild and easy to read. But it's a perfect example of how superhero comics can go beyond just punching and onomatopoeias to deliver deeper meanings and subtext than we're typically used to. And then we go on to The Nobody by Jeff Lemire. Once again, Jeff Lemire draws and writes this one, and it's just kind of his take on a modernized take on his own modernized view and take on the story of the Invisible Man. I know, right? That was an easy one to explain. Monstrous. This one came out a couple years ago and was very big when it came out. It's funny because a lot of people compare how the artwork looks kind of like some of the Final Fantasy work. I forget which video game in particular, but some of the Final Fantasy, which game in particular, but some of the Final Fantasy artwork. But it's by, let me make sure, Marjorie Liu. Yeah, Marjorie Liu and, oh my gosh, this is going to kill me. Marjorie Liu and Sana Takeda, who I believe Marjorie Liu had worked on a lot of the, I think she worked on the X-23 series, but I forget, to be honest. Either way, in this series, we see this this world that is kind of the steampunkish world that also has a lot of supernatural elements, as magical beings and non-human beings are hunted by this world's version of this kind of church, these Templar-esque figures who are trying to rid the world of, or at least control magic. However, this girl, this hero, let's see, Micah Halfwolf, is just trying to discover what has happened in this world or what happened with a conflict in the past, but also that she seems to be possessed by some otherworldly being that is guiding her actions or trying to consume her in whole. Very good read, but once again, I'm very behind on it. I believe it's 3 volumes in right now, and I've only read the first one. So, another work I'll be catching up with in 2019. Then we go to the Midnighter. The Midnighter, part of the New 52 run by DC, and Volume 1 is called Out. I say that and sigh a little bit because this is it's kind of a blatant statement as well as observation of the character's sexuality. Midnighter is one of several homosexual gay characters in DC. Well, not just DC, but comics who is very blatantly, has very blatantly stated their sexual stance and orientation. This is kind of important because there are characters like this, as well as Batwoman. That's Catherine Kane, or Kate Kane, for those who know her. This is important because of the fact that DC and Marvel have tried their best to feature more representation of different characters with different backgrounds in the recent years. So this is actually an interesting comic because I love the kineticism as well as the brutality of Midnighter's character. He's a character who was, during this era, I think Warren Ellis, who I previously mentioned, had written this. It was either Stormwatch or The Authority, but created these alternate XB versions of different heroes, right? So Midnighter was kind of this analog to Batman. Apollo was his analog to Superman, but the Midnighter in particular was this hero who had this fight computer installed in his brain, so he could analyze and assess how best to, upon like just multiple different possibilities, how best to take down any opponent, if not any number of opponents. It's a fantastic read. The character is just very down to earth and gritty. I mean, well, maybe too much grit to the point of it being a little edgy, but I just enjoyed reading it from the story and action standpoint, which is right where you want to be for a superhero comic, unless you're reading it for, I guess, a far deeper meaning. Then we get into I Kill Giants. I actually read this. I Kill Giants. I lent this to a friend recently because he was telling me he had seen the movie that it was based on, but he'd also told me he'd read this book called, he'd seen 2 movies and read 1 book. Wow, this is embarrassing. I can't remember anything right now. Either way, this one has a movie based on it out. I haven't seen the movie, but I Kill Giants talks about a girl who has this obsession with taking down giants. And this kind of causes a lot of distance from her with just people she loves, as well as just her peers in her grade, and seems to have a deeper underlying meaning with why she wants to fight giants, why she believes in this mythology and builds her own kind of world around these beings existing. I'm not going to spoil a lot because it is one of my, it is a comic I highly recommend. If you can find a copy or read it, I cannot recommend it enough, but it's got a lot more going on under the hood. I mean, it takes literally about maybe half to 3/4 the way through the comic for you to kind of really realize the full scope of what is going on. I'm trying to remember what book I was thinking of. Oh, it's the one where like Liam Neeson is a giant tree monster or something like that. Gosh. This is gonna literally kill me. Okay, whatever. Let's just keep going. Next up, we have Marvels by Kurt Busiek and Alex Ross. This is one that I've referenced in the past before as being a very interesting kind of, this kind of second person or third person account of events in the Marvel Comics universe. It's this reporter who's going around kind of exploring from a boots on the ground human perspective all this insanity that's going on around him, from Galactus to X-Men to like just civil rights riots for mutants to seeing the Silver Surfer. I mean, just a lot of incredible things that honestly just seem uncanny to experience. But from a human stance, he's there, he's reporting on it, and yeah, he's just trying to kind of rationalize and take stances on what is going on around him. It's a very beautiful work. I don't just mean from a narrative stance, but from an artwork. I mean, it is just beautiful. Alex Ross always goes hard whenever he draws or paints anything, and it is always enjoyable to see him do a full work. That's when his best works come out, is when he is like works like a Justice and Kingdom Come and Marvels. He does his best work when he draws out entire comics and pages. Once again, I'm going to say this about a lot of books I've gone over, but recommend it. It is one of my top comics of all time, and that is another video series I'll be doing in 2018. My top 100 graphic novels of all time. All right, let's close out because I'm getting tired and y'all are getting tired. My last comic for today will be Mesmo Delivery. This is by artist Raphael Grampa, who I haven't read a lot of because it's kind of hard to find works by him, but who I've enjoyed. He has this kind of grotesque, just very gritty art style, and his art style is very similar to Paul Pope's in a way, who I've mentioned earlier as being the author and artist, or the writer and artist of Escapo. So in Raphael Grampa's tale, Mesmo Delivery, it feels like something out of the Twilight Zone. You've got these two truckers that are delivering a package they don't understand or they don't know about across the, across just, I'm assuming, a U.S. highway. But there's a lot of, it's a short read, there's a lot of violence in a short amount of time and a lot of mystery as well. I'd say I recommend it. Depends on how short of a burn you're wanting. I mean, it literally took me maybe 15 minutes to read it, but I really enjoyed it just because it was a very short episodic burst. It feels like it should be part of a larger collection, but I'm glad I was able to just find this single issue collection of it. All right. Oh my gosh, and congratulations, y'all. That is episode 5 out of this series. Once again, we're going to wrap up with episode 6, but thank y'all so much for joining. Once again, this is my entire comic collection that I have of almost only books that I've read through 2018. So please tune in next time as we finish out all the books in my collection, and thank y'all so much for joining me for another episode of King's Comics.